Job is a high point in Old Testament writing. I remember one time at La Chartreuse that we had a conversation. It was Don Norbert, who had been my guardian angel, as they called l'ange, the angel. They formed the young ones in the initial stages. He said, of all the books in the Old Testament, Job is my favourite. And it is used in the Office of the Dead quite often in the Carthusian order. It is sung, and each time one hears the ancient words coming across the centuries, time stands still. The pain of man is heard again and again, in this generation as in every other, and the question is heard from the depth of the suffering heart: why? Why pain? C.S. Lewis has a whole volume on that, the problem of pain. It is the argument that non-Christians use to argue away God. And yet, our Saviour chose pain. There are some questions that we cannot answer. We're not meant to. It's too simplistic to give an easy answer to a person in severe pain. However, there is a higher wisdom that the saints perceived. Pain is part of something greater. The only pain that is truly tragic is that which will never end. But there will be a time when pain, well accepted, will have freed us from purgatory and helped many others. And then glory will be maximal. There was a great Franciscan, Peter of Alcantara, who was a hero of accepted pain. Indeed, he invented it by mortification. And he appeared to St. Teresa of Avila after his death and said, "O blessed penance, which has merited so great a reward." The Curé Vaz, Jean-Marie Vianney, said shortly before dying, "Comme c'est beau mourir quand on a vécu sur la croix." How beautiful it is to die when one has lived on the cross. At the moment of death, that pain is seen in a different light, the correct light. And indeed it would seem to be a pattern in the lives of the saints that the true friends of the Lord were asked, would they like to carry a portion of the Lord's Passion and spend their time on earth on that cross with Him? It is a sign of predilection, a call to participate in the cross, and to extend in one's members until the end of one's life the passion of the Lord, who now in heaven cannot suffer any more physically, but asks us to give us the use of our limbs. And thus it is redemptive. Our Lady, in a very simple way, taught that to the children of Fatima, showing how and indicating how to help, lest people go there. Prayer and mortification, sacrifice and offering up, and that is our call. for pain is never lacking. With regard to the teaching of the Apostle in the 9th chapter of the first epistle to the Corinthians, it is also a lesson for us, the urgency to preach, to spread, to diffuse. Time is too short to spend it on long discourses on football, when the soul before us, if he dies today, may not make it. There is also in this chapter a teaching about preaching without receiving remuneration. And indeed, Providence took care of the Apostle for that generosity, and always provided. And that is a pattern in the lives of the saints, that when they do the Lord's work, it comes back. Indeed, the Lord's promise is there. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and these things will be added unto you. So one thinks about the kingdom of God and not about the other bit. That is added. It just comes. And the simpler our life, the more easy it is for it to come. We make it difficult for it to come by having too many needs and therefore demands. One of the attractions of the pre-Constitution life, when there was a choice of going back to the enclosed monastic life or going in the direction of the Norbertines, was the fact, and I could see it clearly, that the pre-Constitution rite and the pre-Constitution life is of an upward thrust which gratuitously praises and glorifies and then sees the rest coming back, precisely from the fact of being a priest, a life orientated towards the altar of praise and worship and of, in that case, sacramental praise, the Holy Mass itself, offered daily, and then living on the fact that one is ordained. That is a dynamic which is profoundly interesting. For St. Benedict, the patriarch of the monks of the West, actually unlike St. Basil in the East, was not a priest. And the rule that he wrote does not presume, actually even daily Mass, but it certainly doesn't presume the priesthood. It presumes work, essentially manual work, but it could be intellectual, or both of course. And therefore the monastery under him functions on the basis of remuneration for work, whereas the following of the rule of St. Augustine, and in the specific mode of the canonical life, tends to presume ordination, and therefore living from the fact that one is ministering at the altar and ministering to souls, and therefore it just comes back with regard to the economic growth. And indeed that is evangelical, for we see coming through in the New Testament writings that those who preach the gospel should live by the gospel. The Lord invited them to go out and preach with nothing, but to depend on hospitality and welcome, and they would be taken care of. But they weren't to have any demands. They were to eat what was sent before them, and not to move from place to place, therefore not be fussy. That often is our problem. With regard to the equilibrium of the monastic life and of the pre-Constitution life is based on partly the gospel that we have today. The Lord, rising up a great while before dawn, went into a solitary place, a desert place, and there prayed. And they come after him, and he welcomes them, teaches them, and ministers to them. But the optic is vertical, and then expressed horizontally. That applies to the consecrated life. and in an eminent way to the life of ministry. For what can one give that one has not received? If one has not got that balance of the virgin moment of the pre-dawn, the intimacy of listening to the sound of silence, one only has more of the world to give back to the world. A priest who is an expert at all the latest gadgets, notably working on the screen for hours on end, has only more of that to give to those who have plenty of it already. A priest who has spent a quiet hour with Jesus eyeball to eyeball in the Blessed Sacrament is simpler, but has more of Jesus to give.